On Press Perspective today, we shed light on the most peaceful countries this year and the impact of a weak democracy on the speed of aging. Do stay with us. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Friday, September 5th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. It's that time of the week yet again during which we touch upon a number of intriguing headlines related to the broader society and of course South Korea. For this I have freelance journalist Raphael Rashid here in the studio. Raphael, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Good to be back.
I also have writer Colin Marshall with the pundit's take on today's topics. Colin, welcome back.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Right, Raphael, let's start off then with the latest rankings for the most peaceful country for this year, 2025. Which are the top countries and where does South Korea stand?
Sure. So we have the 2025 Global Peace Index, and it shows that Iceland has retained the top spot for 17th consecutive year since 2006. And it's followed by Ireland, New Zealand, Austria and Switzerland. This index, it was published by the Institute for Economics and Peace and ranks 163 countries. They look at 23 different indicators across 3 domains. So we have societal security and safety, then we have ongoing conflicts, and then something that they call militarization. So this index, in a way, it looks at both kind of internal peace, so domestic safety and stability, but also outside of those countries, outside the country, so external peace. And so then they kind of put the two together and make this ranking. For South Korea, it ranked 41st this year, which is up by 2 ranks compared to the previous year. So apparently maybe slightly more peaceful. And I guess for context, the United States sits much lower at 128th place, which might sound surprising. And in fact, it comes below the likes of Honduras or Bangladesh. But the reason why the United States has this ranking is largely due to the high militarization, including military spending, weapons trade, nuclear capabilities, and of course external military involvement wherever that may be around the world. On the other end of the spectrum, then we have Russia, which became the world's least peaceful country, followed by Ukraine. And this report notes that 59 state-based conflicts occurred in 2023. And this would be the highest number since World War II. I guess if we look at things in a regional context, of course we have North Korea, and North Korea ranked 149th, which is unchanged from last year, and it makes it the second least peaceful country in Asia, ahead of only Myanmar. Of course, when it comes to North Korea, it's the third most militarized country, with the highest possible scores for nuclear weapons, military expenditure as a percentage of the GDP, and armed service personnel rates. So I think this survey or this annual index, it covers most of the world, almost 100% of the world. So again, coming back to South Korea, I think stands in modest grounds, suggests some progress in the indicators, so maybe kind of middle tier globally speaking.
Right. Raphael, another intriguing study published in Nature Medicine reportedly shows that social inequality and weakness in democratic institutions accelerates aging. Walk us through that, please.
Yeah, this one's quite interesting as well. It's a groundbreaking international study that analyzed almost 162,000 participants across 40 countries and introduces what researchers call a kind of global exposome framework, essentially examining how the environment or different factors, whether they're environmental or social or political exposures, how they influence health and disease throughout one's life. So this study, it basically measures something called behavioral age gaps, BBAGs, as they say. So the difference between a person's actual age and then the predicted age based on health, cognition, education, functionality, and risk factors such as cardiovascular conditions or sensory impairments and whatnot. These findings show that where you live can basically age you faster than you should, and kind of increasing risks of cognitive or functional decline. The research, I think, shows quite a clear global gradient. So if we look at, say, Europe, had the healthiest aging patterns, while the likes of Egypt or South Africa showed fastest aging. And then when we look at people in Asia and Latin America, they kind of fell somewhere in the middle. And then we had Eastern and Southern European countries showing a bit more of a rapid aging compared to their Western counterparts. Again, several exposure factors increase this aging process. Physical factors, including poor air quality, social factors, including economic inequality or gender inequality, socio-political factors, such as lack of political representation or restricted voting rights. And so it looks at quite a few different measures. I think regarding Korea specifically, while I don't have necessarily direct data regarding South Korea, I think based on these identified risk factors, I would expect kind of a bit of a mixed picture when it comes to South Korea, since South Korea does face challenges, sometimes with air pollution, rising economic inequality, and has severe or significant political polarization, of course, as we've seen recently. On the other hand, I guess South Korea has high income or higher income, democracy with a strong healthcare and education system. So I think, when you put the two together, I think we'd find Korea to be somewhere in middle grounds or kind of in the middle range alongside other Asian countries.
Right. I see how external factors like the environment affecting your aging process, that I understand. What are your thoughts with regard to these findings? Keeping South Korea in mind, of course, like democracy having an impact on the way you age.
Well, first on the subject of peacefulness, on this peaceful societies ranking, we should always take into account with these types of studies, with this research, who's paying for it. And the organization that commissioned this study, or that did this, that carried out this research, takes a fairly big chunk of money from the Stimson Center, a think tank in Washington, D.C., very concerned with East Asian geopolitics and primarily North Korea. So just to give a sense of where the priorities may lie with the organization commissioning this study. But I think South Korea's rank is pretty good for a country technically at war for a long time. And people will, I think, at first glance, look at this study and they'll think peacefulness refers to sort of life on the streets of the city. When an American visits South Korea, they'll always feel like it's more peaceful here, Seoul is, than in, say, New York or Los Angeles. But they're thinking of a sort of lack of chaos on the streets. Things feel orderly to a visiting American or even European in a way they might not to a Korean. To many Koreans, Seoul is a chaotic city, or South Korea is a chaotic society. But as Raphael mentioned, this is about more militarization. This term we should think a bit about because, yes, the U.S. is militarized abroad, but you don't necessarily feel it within the U.S. The sources of a lack of peacefulness lie elsewhere, domestically. Here, the militarization of the culture has decreased somewhat. I feel it less since I moved here 10 years ago, but it's still, I think, one of those factors that explains a lot about Korean society that people, foreigners, don't usually think about. Why do people act this way? Why do structures in Korean society work this or that way? A lot of times the military is a major factor, and the fact that all Korean men, almost all, went through the military explains a lot about social relations and about the sort of dynamics of this society. So it's something you can't ignore when you want to understand South Korea. But as for these environmental factors that accelerate aging, well, the air quality has been a perennial complaint. I mean, before I moved to Korea, before I visited Korea, all I would hear about Seoul is, oh, this is good, that's good, a lot of cafes, it's convenient, subway's nice, but the air is bad. It always came around to the air being bad. And true enough, there are days when the sky is this sort of flat gray, like in a video game when the background doesn't load. But I don't know, again, maybe I've got used to it, maybe it's got better, but I don't feel the air quality as a factor hampering my quality of life on a day-to-day basis in the way that I used to. This research on the environment specifically gave me a new word as well, exposome. Exposome being not an old word, about 20 years ago it was coined. Exposome is the sum total of the environmental factors to which an individual is exposed. So you're in a less good exposome in South Korea or in Seoul than you would be in a place with cleaner air, I suppose, or other. But maybe better than in certain cities in, say, China, for example. And finally, on inequality, what's interesting there is that people, I think, especially Koreans, will instinctively describe South Korea as an unequal society. And for probably good reasons, but the inequality is never really borne out in the objective research. There is a number, the Gini coefficient, which measures the economic inequality of societies. And if you look at the Gini coefficient just organized, the sort of most unequal to least unequal or the other way around, South Korea is not among the world's most unequal societies, nowhere near among the most unequal societies. Maybe if you look at OECD countries only, it seems a bit more severe, but this is not an unequal a society as people seem to feel it is by the numbers. But what's a good question to pursue in the future, I think, is why it feels unequal. What's making people feel like South Korea is Squid Game, when in fact, looking at the actual rankings, it's, many countries are much worse, the US, of course, being one of them.
It's an interesting way to look at it, seriously. Raphael, staying with living trends here in South Korea then. Now, we've touched upon this next topic quite a bit in the past, but it was recently highlighted yet again by the South China Morning Post. The question being then, so why are foreigners here in South Korea loving the country and yet choosing to leave it, according to the article, Raphael?
I mean, I actually, when I saw that article come out, it's a question that's always crossed my mind, or at least maybe not in my case, but at least people around me, when a lot of people want to come here, but then after a few years they tend to leave. And I don't have a kind of a deep analysis about this, but this is definitely something that I find interesting. And this SCMP article does examine this kind of demographic paradox, while South Korea is kind of opening its doors to foreigners or foreign residents. Then this kind of question about integration or staying in the country has lagged potentially behind. So again, foreign residents, or foreign nationals at least, now account for nearly 5% of the population. Around 2.75 million people. International student enrollments have jumped 25% since 2022 to 209,000, and the government is targeting even more, about 300,000 by 2028. Foreign workers have also surpassed 1 million for the first time last year. So we're definitely seeing more interest in this country, and definitely even the universities are actively recruiting a lot more international students. Maybe it's for clout, or maybe it's to become more international. But then when we look at Statistics Korea survey that found only 16.9% of 25,000 foreign residents surveyed wanted permanent residency, and just 10.3 aspired to citizenship. So for many, I think South Korea remains a place to study or to work temporarily, but maybe not settle permanently. And yeah, I think I meet a lot of people kind of almost weekly who will say that this place is not somewhere that they will stay long term. Not taking this in a positive or negative way, but it is something to wonder why do people believe that this can't be home? The article in question that we're talking about highlights some issues. Potentially it's the rigid visa rules and maybe lack of legal protections as key barriers. South Korea does have about 250 different visas, which advocates call unprecedented in the world. Even those married to Koreans at least friends that I know have to renew their visas every so often as well, and for other visas you need this kind of mandatory integration courses. The article profiles a 27-year-old from Paris who speaks fluent Korean, works at an IT company and is married to a Korean, yet says she faces constant uncertainty and says that she is exposed to workplace exclusion. Again, I'm not here to judge whether this trend that I've heard quite a lot about being excluded, is it perceived, or is it exclusion, or is it the way you come to this country and you believe it's this way, but this is actually the way it works? Of course, it's very difficult to pinpoint exactly where the problem may be, and I think some people will also just complain for the sake of complaining. So it's very difficult to know, where we stand. But again, among developed nations, South Korea stands out for lacking basic anti-discrimination legislation. And I guess a recent example that was highlighted in this article was excluding most foreign residents from the government's consumption stimulus program. Only those with permanent residency or Korean spouses or refugee status were entitled to these coupons worth anything between 150,000 to 450,000 won. I myself, I'm not complaining, but I wasn't entitled to this coupon despite living here for well over 14 years and paying my taxes. So personally, I believe that this kind of, if you've paid your taxes in this country for a certain amount of time, I think anyone should be entitled to it, regardless of the nationality. So I guess when we look at it, there are some contradictions in policy. The government is, of course, investing a lot in these multicultural programs, initiatives, centers, integration programs, but these, I do believe complaints can be complaints, but there are definitely some structural barriers in place. Some researchers say that kind of integration efforts are fundamentally one-sided. Of course, integration works both ways. I don't think we should blame Koreans or Korean society as a whole for any of this kind of demographic paradox. But of course, it does always cross my mind. Why can we not? Why do some people say that this cannot be home?
All right, and let's throw that question to Colin then. Colin, what do you suppose makes long-term residence here in South Korea quite challenging for foreign immigrants?
Yes, as another long-term foreigner here, I try not to sort of turn reformer or turn aspiring reformer, as so many, especially Westerners, do when they come here saying, oh, this should be different, that should be different. But the visa system, as Raphael mentioned, that's got to change. As he underscored, there are more categories of visa here than anywhere in any other country in the world. It doesn't surprise me at all. And the system is too rigid and too complex at once. And every visa is tied to a specific form, like a category of employment, often not well defined. And that really has to change. But the visa system aside, this article also, it brings in a couple foreigners. One mainly, I believe, a French woman who has been here a long time that Raphael mentioned, who's learned Korean, works for an IT company. And she expressed a sentiment you often hear here, which is that no matter what, I'm always perceived as a foreigner first. And true enough, I can understand why that would be objectionable or why it would feel uncomfortable. To my mind, it's never been a problem, but it depends on the foreigner. You can always, you meet people here, foreigners here, who you can tell just every morning they get up filled with anxiety. Like, am I being seen as a foreigner? I remember when I was taking my mom to the National Museum here in Korea, and a little girl near us, she gestured to her own mom. She said, "엄마, 외국인이야." She pointed to us and said, "Oh, foreigners." And I laughed, and my mom asked, what was that about? And I was saying, oh, she said we were foreigners. And my mom was sort of taken aback by this. And if you'd never been regarded as a foreigner before, I guess that comes as a shock as well. But I often wonder with these complaints, I'm always treated as a foreigner. Well, number one, you are, so am I. We could live here the rest of our lives. We'll die foreigners, even if we become Korean citizens, which, again, to my mind, not objectionable, but to some it is, and there are valid reasons why. But if you think about it, I always wonder, what was giving these people the impression that Korea was a society where foreigners were readily integrated? It's much like when I meet traveling Europeans or Americans or other types of foreigners, sometimes they'll complain like, oh, I really thought there would be more English spoken here. And I think, why? What gave you the idea that this was an English-speaking country? What gave you the idea that this was a country accommodating necessarily to non-Koreans? I mean, this is not technically an ethno-state. Foreigners are eligible for citizenship, but it's about as close as you get to an ethno-state while not being an ethno-state. And if you are uncomfortable with that, maybe you might want to find a different country to live in if you're a foreigner. I'm sorry, but I think it comes down to that.
Right. Right, a very realistic view then on today's topic, and I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Right then, as always, Colin, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today. And Raphael, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, on that note, we end this week's editions of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching and have a great weekend.